And welcome to the Gay Liberation Network here on Chicago Access Network. I'm your host, Andy Thayer, and with me is Ryne Poelker, who is a longtime activist in Chicago's housing rights movement. That we've had such a crisis here in housing that it requires a movement, and we'll be going into some of the statistics about that in just a few moments. But before we do, I'd like to call your attention to a few important announcements of stuff that is coming up. Just look up on your screen here. There's going to be a protest a week from tomorrow. That's Saturday, June 4th, because a right-wing organization that's listed as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center has announced a national day of protest against the Target store chain's pro-trans restroom policy, where people are able to go to the restroom according to their gender identity and not be forced to humiliate themselves by not doing so. This protest is going to be coming up again a week from tomorrow. That's Saturday, June 4th at the Target in Uptown at 4466 North Broadway Avenue in Chicago. And another thing that's coming up that I think you'll find interesting, each year, the Gay Liberation Network marches in the Gay Pride Parade with a series of political messages. This year, it's going to be Rom Resign. If you want to join the Rom Resign contingent in this year's Pride Parade, again, meet in front of the Uptown Target at 4466 North Broadway, albeit this time on the last Sunday in June, 11 a.m., and from there we'll be ferrying people to where our contingent is in the march. You can be part of sending a message to over 1 million Chicagoans demanding that Rahm Emanuel resign, whether if you're ticked off about his covering for the police murder of Laquan McDonald so that he could win re-election, or if you're pissed off about his shoveling money to wealthy developers while poor people live underneath bridge viaducts, you name the issue, his lack of funding for education, for mental health clinics. This is where you'll want to be if you want to send a strong message, again, to stand up for the 99% in this city and dump Rahm Emanuel. So, Ryan, tell me a little bit about how you got involved in housing issues. What's your background in this issue?
Okay, well, I guess I would start off with, I was homeless at one point, and I was able to get into housing that I was making, minimum wage at the time. And the housing that was available in Uptown was really my option on the north side. And, in the Uptown neighborhood, it's sort of the last remaining neighborhood in that area that is mixed income, that has economic diversity, that has housing that is affordable to people. And it's, it's surrounded by Lakeview, Ravenswood, Andersonville, a bunch of unaffordable neighborhoods. And we've been putting on this fight in Uptown for quite a while, holding the line on remaining an affordable, diverse neighborhood.
And part of this is not just about economic diversity, it's about racial diversity. There was a recent article in DNA Info just a few days ago about basically the bleaching of Uptown. I myself have been a member of Uptown's community for about 35 years now, and it has gotten considerably more white as poor people, predominantly black and Latino and Asian, have been forced out of the neighborhood by the gentrification. We've lost over 1,000 SRO units in Uptown alone, and this mimics a trend nationwide where supposedly we're losing, I believe it's about 150,000 low-income units nationwide each year, and Uptown has been ground zero for much of that. And we've had an alderman who's played a nefarious role in that.
I think the loss of diversity racially and economically should be placed. That blame should be placed squarely on Alderman James Kappelman and the organization he was part of before he got elected, the Uptown Chicago Commission, who have waged war, at every opportunity against affordable housing in the neighborhood. After Helen Schiller retired in 2011. Kappelman came into power, and what we've seen is he's told the Salvation Army not to feed homeless people. He's attempted to close Before he got elected, he attempted to close shelters in the area. He's gotten in physical altercations with people on the street. He's has very forcefully tried to criminalize loitering, panhandling. The first thing that he did after he got elected was he went to every single business in the neighborhood he could and asked them to put a no loitering sign up, which, as you know, has been roundly rejected in the courts as unconstitutional. The people who get targeted the most by these anti-loitering ordinances are African Americans, homeless people, people who do not fit into their idea of what a North Lakefront neighborhood should be. And yes, we've lost over 1,000, and since Kappelman has taken office, we've lost over 1,000 units of SRO housing. It was single room occupancy housing. And Kappelman, in his joke of a chief of staff, have said that we've lost no affordable housing, but the fact is we've lost over 1,000 units of low cost, low rental SRO housing. There's housing options for people who were one-time homelessness, people who were disabled and living below the poverty line, senior citizens living on a fixed income. It was a housing option for people on the brink of homelessness.
Well, let's hold that thought. I do believe we've got a caller. Caller?
Good evening, how you doing? Is it okay to call you Andy?
Yes, absolutely.
Andy, by any chance, are you familiar with property tax redemption?
I don't believe I am.
In Cook County, it's a big business now because property taxes come twice a year. Now you miss paying one of your property taxes and you have up to 2 years to redeem them. Say for example, say your property tax is $500, all right? And your taxes can double, triple, and say for instance, you go to redeem your taxes after 2 years, your tax can be as much as $3,500. Now, if you don't take care of within that 2 year period time, just keep in mind they got places out of the state that come look up these taxes, and they will buy your taxes, and by the time they get it in the court, and people going through all different types of trouble now. By the time they go to court, and by the time they add attorney fees and court fees, it can go up to $6,000 real easy. And a lot of times, depending on the situation, people can't afford it and let their house go. So I don't call it Cook County no more. It's really Cook County.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. Well, thank you, caller. And that brings up an interesting point that was actually raised in this week's Chicago Tribune, the business section, about how the housing crisis continues particularly in Chicago's poorest neighborhoods. It's recovered in places like Wicker Park and near West Side, where the yuppies are having their little building boom, but so many homeowners in poor neighborhoods are still way underwater in their mortgages, and then ironically in places like Uptown, where there's all the yuppies moving in, then people are being priced out because of the property taxes.
Well, yeah, people are being priced out for the property taxes, the rise of rental costs, and it's no accident that when we see a lot of gentrification in areas like San Francisco, there is a lot of homelessness in Wicker Park. That's where homeless people are being attacked. The people are saying, well, we're going to attack people who are intentionally homeless, and I don't know how they figure out who's intentionally homeless. And there's a massive amount of homelessness in Uptown, and it's no coincidence that when you have a lot of gentrification and displacement, you have a lot more people who are homeless. I mean, just look at New York City and San Francisco.
Well, and we have, according to the Chicago Coalition of the Homeless, a couple of years ago, there statistics showed that there were 125,000 homeless in the city of Chicago, and that includes some 22,000 enrolled CPS students. And you look at this graphic that I'm pulling up on the screen right here, can show what has happened to the city of Chicago. You look on the left, which is 1970, you see a whole areas of gray. That's people in the middle of the income range. The The dark red is the extreme poverty. The dark green is the extreme wealth. You see little blips of extreme wealth right along the lakefront on the near north side. You see some areas of deep red. This is 1970 again on the left. Then you look to the right, and the areas of extreme poverty have blossomed over much of the city. The gentrification you can see in the light green and especially the dark green along the lakefront along the north side. And when you look at our city and you see the violence rates that we have right now, you can see that whole neighborhoods have been totally deprived of housing resources, of income resources, of education resources, and thanks to Rahm Emanuel shutting down half the city's mental health clinics, mental health resources. So is it any wonder that we have a violence problem in the city, both civilian on civilian as well as police on civilian? Because if you're trying to maintain that level of inequality, which is basically the police are in charge of keeping the status quo, that's what you've got. If you deprive whole communities of basic resources, of housing, of jobs, and so forth, is it any wonder that that you have the ballooning violence rates? We had 500 more shootings this year as of a week ago this past Thursday compared to the previous year. And as the Black Lives Matter movement activists have aptly pointed out, they don't want more police. We already have got more police per capita in the city of Chicago than almost any other city. And what the BLM activists have been talking about is we need our communities resourced, and housing, which is what we're talking about here, is one of the key ones.
Well, and the last guy that called in, he brought up property taxes being raised, and where is that property taxes going? It's going to fund luxury housing developers. It's going
TIF funds,
TIF money that's going to developers that have donated to Rahm Emanuel. I mean, he's very blatant. In the uptown neighborhood we were just talking about, the TIF they want to use there, which is pretty much a tax break for this developer. He's given Rahm Emanuel $5,000. People who've worked, people that are worked for that developer have given thousands of dollars to Rahm Emanuel. It's like that across the city. It's you give Rahm Emanuel a couple $1,000s for his campaign war chest, and you get millions of dollars in TIF money back. It's less of a campaign contribution as much as
it's an investment,
financial investment.
Yeah.
And so. That gentleman brought up, property taxes going up. Well, where's it going? It's going to more police. It's going to luxury housing. It's going to displacing Chicagoans. It's not a sustainable path for our city.
Okay, well, let's hold that thought and let's take this next caller.
To show you how some cities had dealt with a homeless problem at one time, how New York City dealt with it, they gave the people bus tickets to go anywhere they want in the country. And if you remember, when I'm talking about Daley Jr. got in the office, he said he made a commitment to do away with homelessness. And that was 21 years ago, back in 1995, and the best of my recollection, not too much had been done.
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you, caller. And
we see the same promises today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember that people were promised one-to-one replacement housing when they got rid of Cabrini Green, when they got rid of Robert Taylor Homes, when they downsized Abla. Now we've got Lathrop on the chopping block on prime riverfront property. And the CHA, which is sitting on top of $440 million in its bank account, rather than repairing housing, it simply lets it go fallow and then says, oh, oops, this housing needs to be torn down or needs to be redeveloped for rich people.
Yeah. People who donate to Rahm Emanuel, and Lathrop Homes was a public housing, was on prime real estate. Condos there are going for $500,000. And Rahm Emanuel's donors saw a
market
opportunity, and they took advantage of it, and they displaced those people. They tore up communities. And the same thing with Cabrini Green. That was on prime real estate. And they tore up those communities because it was all about money. It was all about people who donate to the mayor. It's all about people who donate to your local alderman most of the time. And
It's a
this is
vicious
what we
cycle.
get. And
Yeah.
people are treated as objects. People are just torn apart. They're pushed around. They're given no agency on what happens to them, and it's appalling.
Well, the thing is as dire as the situation is, I think it's important to note that it doesn't have to be this way. As corrupt as our city is, as venal as our real estate developers and their allies are, there's a reason why Lathrop Homes was built in the first place. And that was actually a project that was built in the 1930s. According to all accounts, it was great housing at the time. Working class people enjoyed living there because it was built fresh, it was maintained, and that was a direct result of the movements of the 1930s, where people were in the streets demanding in a far more sustained way than any of us have seen in our lifetimes, but people were literally demanding in a way that put the fear of God into the democratic machine, that they had to deliver. They had to build housing for people. They had to give jobs and so forth that the people needed. But that was a direct result of struggle, that we had these large projects where working class people could get affordable housing. After the movements died out, after the end of the 1960s, early 70s, that's when you started to see public housing go to seed. That's when you saw the disinvestment in communities and the building up of downtown at the expense of communities.
Yeah.
It's really
And it
important to know this history because we can turn it around. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement has shown, in terms of the gains that it has won, as limited as they are, that we can win things. We can win things like a Southside Trauma Center. We can win things like the firing of a police superintendent.
And you talked about the disinvestment of public housing that existed in a period of disinvestment of all public resources, public education, food assistance, assistance to single mothers with children, transportation, public transportation. So public housing, the disinvestment of public housing, the intentional neglect of public housing existed alongside the intentional neglect of anything that's public, and it's headed on a path to privatization. Ready to be made.
And I think it's important to note, because this is one of the typical divide and conquer techniques that our opponents have used. It's important to note that all working class people, regardless of race, benefit from a healthy public housing program, because it forces down private market rates, whether you're in CHA or not. When there is a large stock of good CHA housing, when there is a large stock of other low-income housing, then you've got fewer people chasing after limited amounts of units. As I mentioned earlier in the show, we are losing annually 125,000 units of low-income housing each year. There was a study that came out in 2014 that showed that 49.3% of people in the United States are now spending over 30% of their income on rent. And that is basically, 30% is the dividing line between whether or not you're going to make it or not. And basically half of Americans are not making it, according to that statistic. And even worse, some 26% of Americans are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. And that's totally not making. That means that you're skimping on things like medical, you're skimping on things like food, you're skimping on other basic necessities. And that's the kind of country that we've grown into over the last few decades. And I think it leads to all sorts of kinds of social dysfunction. And that's why housing is so important as part of a broad spectrum approach to winning real gains for the 99%.
Yeah.
So, Ryne, I want to dig a little bit deeper. You're talking about the role of our local political machine. You've dug into this. It's my understanding from talking with you that, for example, in the 46th Ward, James Kappelman, none of his staff even live in the ward that they're ruling over.
I don't know if none, but Almost most of his staff don't live in the ward. A lot of his, he's always attacked people for taking contributions outside the ward, but then he seemed to have no self-reflection on the fact that his top donor was a real estate banking firm from Atlanta that gave him $20,000. Almost $200,000 of his last campaign alone came from property managers, real estate brokers, real estate agents, developers, real estate banking. Those interests just poured into his campaign. And he says, oh, I'm representing the community. Look at all these contributions I've gotten in the community. Okay, but what kind of contributions are they? They're contributions from developers who want to push people out of the community. It's contributions from property managers and landlords in the community. He's not representing renters. He's not representing homeless people, and he's not representing people that live in public housing in the ward. He is only about that upper crust, that upper income level of people who own and people who profit.
And his so-called advisory committee that is appointed by him is made up almost exclusively of
campaign donors,
owners, and overwhelmingly white.
Almost entirely white, except for maybe one person out of 30, and almost entirely property owners.
And
I don't think
there's
hardly any renters represented on there.
Read Ben Jarafsky's article in the current issue of The Reader, because he talks about the $16 million TIF, $16 million in TIF funds that Kappelman wants to shovel to what he terms prime lakefront property, as if you need this kind of money in terms of tax subsidies to build luxury high-rises next to Lincoln Park. I mean, it's just absurd, because literally a few hundred yards away are the homeless living underneath the viaducts. And that's one thing that we just got a couple minutes left here, Ryan. Say a few words about Rahm Emanuel's latest plan to solve the housing crisis along Lakeshore Drive.
Well,
the 75 slots.
So Rahm Emanuel is doing a pilot program where he's going to house 75 people who are sleeping under Lakeshore Drive, which isn't a solution to even solve the amount of it's not even going to solve the homelessness under the viaducts. There's over 100 people that live under the viaducts. There's probably another 100 people that sleep in the parks. And so it's not even going to solve homelessness in one area. It would not even come close to solving 1/10 of the amount of homelessness that's in the uptown neighborhood alone. Meanwhile, the 125,000 homeless people. So it's just a PR stunt. They want to clear the viaducts for concerts and to make revenue and to make profits for people.
Well, we're going to be wrapping things up here, but first I wanted to call a few announcements to your attention. Again, a week from tomorrow, Saturday, June 4th, there is going to be a protest in front of Target to defend Target against the anti-trans right-wing, the so-called religious right, which has targeted Target, no pun intended, because the store has courageously come out with a pro-trans, respecting trans people policy in terms of the restroom policies for both employees as well as patrons in the store. And then also coming up the last Sunday in June, join us for the Pride Parade. We're going to be having a great march, and we want you to be part of that. It's to be part of our Rahm Resign contingent in the Pride Parade. And again, that's going to be beginning on the last Sunday in June. And then finally, just like to thank all those who made tonight's shows possible.